I now call on the leader of Sinn Féin, Deputy Gerry Adams.
I want to welcome the survivors of the Magdalene Laundries who are with us today in the public gallery, and the hundreds more who will follow today's debate very intently. I especially want to commend the women themselves and those groups and individuals who advocated on their behalf. You shone the light so that the rest of us could see agus támuid fuir buic díobse. Agus támuid a lig go han bronach when a ruddy a yarna and stouch na manra croga untach shaw. I also, Taoiseach, want to acknowledge and to thank you for your fulsome and comprehensive apology on behalf of the state to the Magdalene women and to commend your remarks. The proclamation of 1916, a proclamation which is yet to become a reality, at a time when women did not have a vote, addresses itself to Irish men and Irish women, giving recognition to that reality. And it was a mission statement of Irish republicanism at the start of the 20th century, which remains as vital and relevant today as it was then. It's a charter of right for citizens that guarantees religious and civil liberties and equal rights and equal opportunities for all. It's a charter of rights for equality and solidarity and freedom for all the people of this island. But that is not what emerged in our partitioned island post-1916. Taoiseach, the women and the girls in the Magdalene Laundries had no rights. They were objects in a conservative dispensation governed by conservative elites in the church and the political establishment. And in the manner of their incarceration and in their treatment, the Magdalene Laundries, these women were slaves. These girls were slaves. Slaves of a brutal and inhuman regime which Irish governments turned a blind eye to. Indeed, successive governments endorsed and used these institutions. The Anti-Slavery International defines slavery, and I quote, "People are sold like objects, forced to work for little or no pay, and are at the mercy of their employers." There are common characteristics which distinguish slavery from other human rights violations. These include when a person is forced to work, dehumanised, treated as a commodity, physically constrained, or to have restrictions placed on his or her freedom of movement. And last September, I listened to President Obama describe slavery as when a woman is locked in a sweatshop or trapped in a home as a domestic servant, alone, abused and incapable of leaving. That's slavery. These are descriptions which I'm sure the Magdalene women, the survivors listening to this debate, will immediately identify with. It was an essential part of their life experiences in the laundries. And James M. Smith, in a recent article, gives one graphic example of this. He describes how two sisters were put to work. One of the two, aged 14, was placed in the Good Shepherd convent in New Ross. He recounts the horror of her existence. He says, "For the next 5 years, she washed society's dirty laundry and received no pay. When she refused to work, the nuns cut her hair as punishment. The hair grew back, but to this day the loss of her education angers her. To her it was a prison, and all but name. There was no inspector, no child welfare officer. She was abandoned and no one cared. 60 years later, this woman lives with the stigma and the shame attached to these institutions. These are the indelible stains on her life." Taoiseach, this was slavery, and as you have said, the state failed to challenge it, to end it, or to provide for its victims. On the contrary, as we now know, the state employed this system for decades. In July 1960, James Connolly's daughter, Nora Connolly O'Brien, addressed a seanad on the then Criminal Justice Bill. That piece of government legislation, according to Nora Connolly O'Brien's contribution to the debate, would permit young women on remand to be legally committed to St Mary's Magdalene Asylum. And Nora warned that any girl held there would, as she said, suffer for the rest of her life the stigma of having at one time been an inmate of that asylum. The bill provided, that's the bill in this Oireachtas, that girls will have a choice to go to St Mary's, to Magdalene, or to go to prison. And Nora Connolly O'Brien's objection to the Magdalene system was so great that she said that if asked for her advice, she would tell girls wholeheartedly to choose prison. Taoiseach, much of what was done in the laundries, the ill treatment inflicted on women and young girls, some as young as 9, has also been described in previous reports. The Ryan report details the women's forced unpaid labour in the laundries and states that their working conditions were harsh, they were completely deprived of their liberty, and they suffered both physical and emotional abuse. Those who tried to escape and who were caught were returned to these institutions. As far back as November 2010, an assessment report on the Magdalene Laundries by the Irish Human Rights Commission called on the government to establish a statutory inquiry and to provide redress for the survivors. The following May, the United Nations Convention Against Torture commanded that the Irish state should ensure that survivors from the laundries obtain redress. It also expressed its grave concern at the failure by the state to institute prompt, independent and thorough investigations into the allegations of ill treatment of the women. The government, and it's to be commended, set up the Interdepartmental Committee in June 2012 to clarify whether the state had any interaction with the laundries. Taoiseach, I welcome the publication of the Martin Lease report and thank him and his team for their work. But the government's strictly limited terms of reference mean that some of the Magdalene Laundries and the stories of some of the women are not included in this report. According to Amnesty International today, this also includes previously unknown laundries in the north. And nor does the report cover the scandalous and equally harsh conditions in Bethany Home. So these significant gaps have to be addressed. The comprehensive and effective resolution of the treatment of girls and women by the state and institutions is to be achieved. Taoiseach, I also want to welcome the meetings you had with the Minister of Justice in the last week with some of the survivors and with the Taoiseach before that. I also have had the honour of meeting some of these women myself, and they are remarkable women who are living witnesses of a terrible injustice. They will have told you, as you have told us, of their personal experience and of the horrendous and brutal conditions endured by over 10,000 women in Magdalene Laundries. And I know that some of the survivors feel that the 1,000-page report by Senator McAleese does not accurately reflect the abuse and the suffering that all the women endured in these institutions. For example, the report states that only a minority experienced physical abuse and none suffered sexual abuse, and many will take issue with this statement. But Taoiseach, your apology this evening for what occurred will be warmly welcomed. What is now needed is a process, redressed by the state, that treats all of the Magdalene survivors on the basis of equality and provides for their future in a comprehensive fashion. As you've acknowledged clearly, the starting point must be that their incarceration was wrong, that they were treated as slaves, that their basic rights as citizens and human beings were trampled on, and the state must bear the burden of putting this right. And time is of the essence. Many of these women are elderly and unwell. They have lived with the stigma of Magdalene Laundries and the brutality they experienced during their incarceration for their entire lives. So the government has a responsibility to act quickly. We cannot compound the women's trauma by failing to respond promptly and in a satisfactory way. And the Dáil may have concerns about the redress scheme that has been announced and that you have put in place, or at least that you have commissioned the report to be supplied by Justice John Quirk. And we will want to hear more of the detail of that. But the state has a responsibility to care, to protect citizens from abuse, and in our acknowledgement that the state failed, that it failed all the girls and women without any exception whatsoever, requires that we put forward a non-adversarial redress scheme. The women must be compensated for lost wages and pensions, Any of their immediate health, housing and counselling needs must also be promptly catered for. A package needs to be prepared for these women to compensate for the effects of the abuse that they suffered in the laundries, and that requires a transparent compensation package. And that will be the mark against which the government's proposals will be judged. As Martin McAleese himself records in his report, the women endured unspeakable horror. He says, "None of us can begin to imagine the confusion and fear experienced by these young girls, in many cases little more than children, on entering the laundries, not knowing why they were there, feeling abandoned, wondering whether they had done something wrong, and not knowing when, if ever, they would get out and see their families again." So we're all agreed the Magdalene women have suffered long enough. They now need justice. And despite their experiences, many of them, at least all of them that I have met, have remained feisty and strong and resilient and good-humoured, and some of them have campaigned relentlessly for justice over many, many years. They are more than victims. They are more than survivors. They've become role models for the rest of us on this island and others beyond who seek justice and equality and freedom. So the Magdalene women are an inspiration, and this Dáil owes them, and the people of this island owes them, a debt of gratitude for their endeavours on behalf of each other and all those who are victims of abuse. We're